What's up, MJ? What's up, everybody? We're breaking out the banjo. The banjo's like the happiest instrument on earth. Nathan says, my girlfriend just said you bring her so much joy. That makes me happy. The banjo should bring you joy. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well. You guys know that song? almost fell over. Banjo, everybody! Morning, morning, morning. Okay. We got to get started here, guys. Encore! I'm glad you guys like it. Banjo's really fun. Okay. Let's try this. I needed more cowbell. Agreed. We needed a little more cowbell with that banjo. Let's get set up here. I got this. Okay, I got this handout. I apologize, guys. I uploaded this real late. So if you're printing this out, didn't have very much time. My apologies. Let's get started. Let's go back here really quick. Because at the end of last time, well, like the Tour de France is going on right now, right? Have any of you guys been keeping up with that a little bit? I've been watching some recaps of the stages. But when we talk about cycling and getting from point A to point B as fast as possible, a cyclist can only produce torque according to a function like this on the left. For low pedaling speeds, they can produce a lot of torque, but for higher pedaling rates, that drops off. And if you look at the power a cyclist produces, it's something like this. It's parabolic, and the maximum power is produced over a limited range of pedaling speeds. And it's the same thing with cars. We looked at a couple examples, like a Mustang. In blue is the torque as a function of engine speed, and in red is the horsepower. And every car, every engine sort of has a different DNA of how they produce torque over engine speed. All right, so this brings us to gears. So as I just mentioned, engines produce torque and power only over a limited range of rotational speeds. You know, up to like 6,500 RPM, maybe higher for a car engine, and then it starts to drop off. So what do gears do? So we're going to show today, gears allow an engine to operate at its ideal rotational speed. So that's one of the purposes of gears. No matter what our road speed is, we're going to implement a gear ratio that allows the engine to operate in its sort of sweet spot. Gears have another property. They modulate the relative torque between rotating shafts. Adjusting the mechanical advantage of the engine. In cars, gears serve to amplify the torque that comes out of the engine downstream the drivetrain. On bicycles, it's actually reversed, which we'll show in an example today. The torque you produce at the pedals of the bicycles actually is de-amplified at the driven wheel, or attenuated. That's the word I like to use. Excuse me. So the gear ratios on bikes are quite different than the gear ratios in cars. So I want to hash out these two properties. The first one we're going to look at, how do gears modulate the relative speed of rotating shafts? The first thing we're going to look at is a bicycle, and I want to show you this YouTube video first because it's concise and it really gets the point across.
Gears are a fundamental part of a bicycle. They allow you to take on steep climbs and keep the pedals turning on the flats all at the same time. But how do they actually work? The gears on a bike can be broken down into three areas of componentry: the chainrings, including the front derailleur, the cassette, including the rear derailleur and pulley wheels, and the shifters. The chainrings are attached to the cranks, and most road bikes have two of them. Chainrings are defined by the number of teeth on the inner and outer rings, and these days setups for road bikes can be grouped into three categories: standard, semi-compact, and compact. A standard chain set has 53 teeth on the big ring and 39 teeth on the inner. A semi-compact has 52 teeth on the outer ring and 36 on the inner ring, and a compact has 50 teeth on the big ring and 34 on the inner ring. A standard chain set has the hardest gears of the three setups, while a compact has the easiest. The group of cogs attached to the rear wheel is the cassette. Most road bikes will have between 9 and 12 cogs, ranging from 11 teeth on the smallest cog up to 32 teeth on the biggest. The number of cogs determines the so-called speed of the bike. 9 cogs means a 9-speed bike, and so on. The derailleurs are operated by the shifters on the handlebars. The derailleurs shift the chain between the inner and outer ring on the front, and the cogs on the cassette on the back. The front derailleur is operated by the left shifter, and the rear derailleur by the right. So that's a bike's gears in a nutshell, but what about gear ratios? A gear ratio is expressed simply as the number of teeth on the chainring versus the number of teeth on the cog of the cassette the chain is currently sitting in. This then determines the number of rotations your rear wheel will make for one complete pedal stroke. For example, if you are in the big ring on the front, let's say it's a 52, and the smallest cog on the back, let's say a 12, then the ratio is 52 to 12. Then you just divide the big ring number by the small ring, so 52 divided by 12, to give you the number of rotations. In our example, 4.3. So one turn of the pedals will result in 4.3 rotations of the wheel. That would be our biggest gear, of course, with each pedal stroke resulting in the greatest distance traveled. The reverse...
So that little piece right here is what I want you to see. Like, you're producing power at the pedals, and think of that as your engine that's rotating at a certain speed. So the function of these gears is to modulate the relative speed of this shaft versus the speed of the rear wheel. So you see that
gear, of course,
you're pedaling kind of slowly, but the rear wheel is pedaling much faster.
In relation to the smallest gear. With a chain in the small ring...
So we'll leave it at there, and then we'll break it down. We'll break it down right here.
36, for example, on the front.
Let's pause this. Okay, so let's zoom in here. So on a bicycle, we're focused on a bicycle first because I think this is a more intuitive way to think of gears, and then we're going to move into cars next week. So be patient. So let's say we have this front outer chain ring. This is where you're pedaling and producing power. This gear has 53 teeth, and this shaft rotates an angular distance theta 1. And then when you rotate this, it pulls the chain a distance s, let's say. And then this gear in the back has to rotate through that distance s to produce some angle theta 2. And this angle is going to be much larger than the angle at the front. So that's a function of the gears or the teeth on the gears being equally spaced. So if the chain is pulled a distance s, both the front and rear gears also need to rotate through an arc length s, and that gives us this relationship right here. So the arc length that the front shaft that you're pedaling on rotates through is the radius of that gear times the angle it rotates through. That's the distance the chain is pulled. So that has to be equal to the distance that the rear gear moves through as well. So we have R1 times theta 1 is R2 times theta 2. That arc length at the front and the back has to be the same length, but this the rotational distance will be different. So if the outer chain ring has 53 teeth, so that's that bigger front gear, and the rear gear only has 11 teeth, then the front gear must have a circumference that is 53 over 11 times longer. So if those teeth are all equally spaced and the front gear has more teeth, it's obviously going to have a larger circumference. So 2 pi times the radius is the circumference of that. And this is going to be, well, let's put in the circumference of the rear gear. And just because this front gear has more teeth, it's going to be 53 over 11 times longer in circumference than the rear cassette. So this gives us, by definition, the relative radii of these gears. 53 over 11. Okay, and we're getting down to this issue here. So if the pedal rotates an angle theta 1, how much more does the rear tire that's connected to that rear gear have to rotate? Well, theta 2 is going to be R1 over R2 times theta 1. So it's 53 over 11 times theta 1. So it's almost like in this gear setting, if you pedal once around, the rear tire is going to go almost 5 times around. I think that's what we're going to show in this example here. Okay, so if we have this gear ratio, how far does the bike move if the pedal is rotated once around? And let's assume that the radius of the rear tire is 1/3 of a meter. Okay, so we'll call theta 1 angular distance of pedal. And we said we pedaled it one time around. So let's put that in radians. 1 revolution is 2 pi radians. Now, the rear, so this is the angular distance of rear tire. We know it has to spin around more times. It's going to be 53 over 11 times theta 1, which was 2 pi radians. So that's 4.8 revolutions. If you rotate around the pedals one time, the rear tire, the rear tire is going to rotate 4.8 times. So how far does the bike actually move? Well, this comes back to our rolling constraint, which we derived sometime last week. So you take the radius of the tire and you multiply that by the angular distance that the tire has covered. We call that theta 2. So 1/3 of a meter times, 4.8 revolutions. Let's put this in here. Times radians. And we know radians are dimensionless. This is 10.0912 meters. That is kind of interesting. In this most extreme gear on a bike, you pedal one time around and you move over 30 feet. Okay. So now let's talk about speed. This is how far the bike moves. Let's do another example. Let's say we're pedaling at 90 RPM, which is it's a pretty fast cadence. How fast? Just like overdrive in a truck, the wheels are spinning faster than the crank. Wait, can that happen? Oh, I guess so. Yeah. The engine is usually in a car, the engine is always spinning faster. It's the fastest spinning thing. Hold on. The engine is the fastest rotating component in your car. Everything else rotates slower. It's reversed on a bike. Your pedaling speed is the slowest rotating component on a bike, and the wheels are spinning fastest. You'll see it's reversed. Okay, so we're pedaling at 90 RPM. So the relative velocity of the rear wheel, it's going to have to be 53 over 11 times faster than you're actually pedaling. So we're going to take 53 over 11 times 90 RPM. And you're going to get 433.6 rotations per minute. Which is basically 45 radians per second. So how fast is the bike translating? Well, we'll use that rolling constraint again. You take the radius of the tire times the angular velocity, which we said it's 1/3 of a meter times 45 radians per second. And you're moving 15 meters per second, or approximately 34 miles per hour. So if the pedaling speed is slower than that of rotating speed of tires in the bicycle, doesn't that violate the law of conservation of energy? No. No, because I'd have to break that down a little bit, but it doesn't. It's just that, think about it physically. If you're pedaling at a certain rate, I think of it from this geometrical principle. Like these two shafts are connected rigidly by this chain. So if I rotate this first gear a certain amount, it's going to pull this chain that distance s. This gear has to move through that same distance s because it's rigidly connected to this chain. So by necessity, that thing's going to rotate more. So if this one is pedaling at a certain rate, this guy has to be spinning faster. So yeah, energy is conserved. It's just the mechanism. For speed has same ratio as angle movement. That's right, Lewis. That's right. That's right. The relative speed between gears follows that same ratio. That means the smaller the radius of the rear wheel, faster the bicycle moves ahead. Well, not the rear wheel, the rear cassette gear. The smaller that you make this gear, the more times this shaft has to rotate around. But this shaft is connected, to a big tire. that rotates in sync with that gear, so it's going to pull through the same angle. So yeah, making that rear gear smaller, it makes it spin even more and makes the bicycle move faster. Yes. I think I see what you mean, and about the conservation of energy. And this is going to help. This next part's going to help, because you're going to see, to pedal in that gear, it's much harder for you. If you guys have been on a bike and you've pedaled in a difficult gear like that, it takes, you got to use more power. Like it takes a lot more effort to turn the pedal once around. So depending on the gear ratio, it takes a different amount of effort. So that's what I'm explaining here. If you ride a bicycle, you know that you can change between gears at the front and the rear, and the gear ratio in this example, so 53 teeth at the front to 11 teeth in the back, it's very difficult to pedal with. That takes some work. So if you're starting your bicycle from rest and you started in that gear, you might fall over, because it's just really hard to pedal that and balance. You're going to transition to this gear ratio once you're at like a higher speed. So let's talk about why that is. And we're going to look at the mechanics of this situation back here. All right, so you apply torque at the pedals. We know that that's going to rotate this mechanism, and then we have this geometric constraint with the gears. If I rotate this front gear a certain amount, this one's going to have to spin a certain amount dictated by the gear ratio. And ultimately, this is going to produce a tractive force at the ground, and that's going to propel us forward. All right, so let's break this down. We're going to start with a free body diagram of the pedal assembly. So just kind of looking at the pedals in this front chainring. So, okay, first thing, you're going to press down on these pedals, and that's going to produce a torque. We'll call it T. A torque about that shaft. Now, when you produce that torque, you're going to get a resistive force on this chain ring, you know? Like you're going to be trying to pull this chain along, but relative to this body, you're going to feel this resistive force from the chain, because you're overcoming the inertia of the rear tire and all of that stuff. All right, so we're going to use Newton's laws to analyze this. So the moment of inertia of the pedal assembly attached to the gears times the angular acceleration is going to be equal to the sum of moments. So we're going to have the torque positive minus the torque about this shaft produced by the force of the chain. So the force times the radius of that gear. Now, what I want to do here is I want to write this acceleration of the pedal in terms of the acceleration of the rear tire. So I know that if the front tire is accelerating this much, the rear tire is going to be accelerating even more. How much more? Well, it's going to be dictated by that gear ratio. 53 over 11 times more. And then we'll just keep this stuff on the right-hand side. Okay, so now I'm going to solve for the force in the chain right here. Because I want to be able to substitute this into the next equation that we're going to get. You'll see that. So, moment of inertia. This one is R1, this is R2. Because I think I want to keep this in terms of R1 and R2. F chain torque minus I1 Oh, wait. I mixed this up. Look at this. Okay. I'm writing this acceleration in terms of the acceleration of the rear. So this number is going to be bigger. So I reversed this. Yeah, I messed up. Because the front is spinning much slower. So it's going to be this times the rear. What is the physical meaning of the force of the chain? Can I understand it like a kind of friction? Yeah, sorry about that mix-up. I wouldn't think of it as friction. I would think of it as like, okay, imagine this. Imagine that you're pedaling and you pick up the rear tire from the ground. So it's not even connected to the ground. Then it would be much easier to pedal, right? Because you wouldn't have the frictional force from the ground on the rear tire. So what I'm saying is this force that you're feeling is related to overcoming the inertia of spinning up the rear components and also dealing with the friction that is between that rear tire and the road. This force from the chain is just taking into account that I'm doing work on something. Okay. So this is R2, this is R1. Okay, so, I'm going to bring this over to the right-hand side, but I want to leave it in terms of R2 and R1. And then I need to divide the whole thing by R1. Sorry, okay, I hope that makes sense now. I did not mean to confuse. Okay, so... And maybe this force from the chain will make a little more sense here now that you look at the rear, because let's do a free body diagram on this. So from the perspective of the rear tire, I'm going to have the force from the chain pulling this way. Because, up at the front, you're rotating that gear, it's pulling the chain, so the rear tire feels the force going this way. So these two have to be equal and opposite. Is that a bike? Is there friction between the chaining teeth and the chain links? I'm not considering the frictional losses between them. I'm just assuming that they're rigidly connected. Okay, so we're going to have the force from the chain that's going to be rotating this. And then at the road surface, there's going to be some friction, some tractive force, and that's going to be propelling us forward. So we're assuming that there's no slipping there at the road interface. And so let's do the sum of moments about this shaft. And it's really hard to see here, but if I zoom in, the radius of this gear, once again, is R2. And then the radius of the whole tire, I just have R sub T. So the moment of inertia of the tire, along with this rear cassette, times the angular acceleration is going to be equal to the sum of moments. So one of the moments is coming from the chain acting over the radius of that rear cassette. So just force times radius, that's a torque. And that is tending to rotate the wheel that way, right? But if you think of this friction force from the road, that tractive force, it tends to fight. It wants to spin the wheel the other way. in terms of torque. So we're going to subtract that moment contribution. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this expression for the force in the chain that we got up above, and I'm going to substitute it in right down here. So this next line, that's all I'm doing. I'm substituting that expression. And I'm just going to rearrange things a little bit. The torque minus this. So I'm just expanding a couple things out, but all I'm doing is substituting that force from the chain up above. And then what I'm going to do on this next line, I'm going to take this angular acceleration term, move it over to the left-hand side. So I'm going to have the inertia of the tire. I just called this torque. Plus this term that I brought over from the right-hand side. And then I'm going to have R2 over R1 times the torque. And then we just have this tractive force times the radius of the tire here, still broken down. Okay, so I wrote a couple things in advance here that I want you to take away from this. This on the left-hand side, multiplying the angular acceleration, this is the combined inertia of the tire and the pedal subsystem with respect to this rear tire shaft. So it's just a combined inertia. And this is the most important thing from this example that I want to show you, that shows you a property about gears. So this torque, this is the torque that we produce at the pedals, all right? Overall, this term is the torque from the pedals that the rear tire feels. And that's R2 over R1 times the torque, where R2 is the radius of the rear cassette and R1 is the radius of the front. So this is like 11 over 53. So I think I make a comment down here. So imagine like this number is basically 1/5. So the rear tire is feeling like 1/5 of the torque that you're producing at the pedals. Okay, so I think, yeah, the torque that you produce on the pedals is attenuated, which just means made smaller, by a factor of R2 over R1 by the time it reaches the rear tire. So that is, if R2 over R1 is 11 over 53, the torque that you produce at the pedals is reduced almost by a factor of 5 at the rear tire. So that's why it feels really difficult to pedal that thing in that gear. Now, I mentioned this a little bit before, but this is an interesting difference between bicycles and cars. So bicycles use gear ratios that attenuate or make smaller the torque you produce, whereas cars are going to use gear ratios that amplify the torque the engine produces. So if you're in first gear in a car, that's the gear that's going to amplify the torque the most. It's the reverse of the situation you see in a bike. The engine has a certain torque it produces, and it's multiplied a couple times at the rear axle. Okay, so our goal in this course is getting from A to B as fast as possible. So from our perspective, bicycles, cars, whatever, we're interested in how do I choose gears to maximize acceleration? So that's the interesting problem that I want to get to. And it's very interesting with cars as well. So, okay, we're going to go through an example to illustrate the principle of choosing gears for maximum acceleration. So, okay, let's say we have a cyclist, and now we're going to assume that there's a rear cassette, so this rear gear, and it has 3 options you can choose. So one gear is going to be 11 teeth, and that's like the one we've been working with so far. So it's a very small one. The next gear has 20 teeth, and then this other gear has 32 teeth. And we're going to assume that the front gear has an outer chain ring with 53 teeth. So that can't be changed. So using this configuration, 53 over 11, we can travel the farthest, but it would require the most power. Okay, you travel farthest per rotation of the pedal. And over that distance, does it actually require more power over time? I don't think so, actually. Because the amount of work done is the same, right? Well, and it depends on how fast you cover that distance. So that sounds like a simple question, but I think I don't think that's. I think it depends on more than just on how far you travel. We want to maximize acceleration for a fixed energy expenditure, right? And it's not space-time. I don't think it's as simple as that either. Like, we're maximizing acceleration. Let me go back here real quick. In terms of this relationship, the strategy we're going for is actually probably going to consume the most amount of energy. But what we're concerned with is choosing a gear that puts the cyclist at a pedaling rate where they can produce the most acceleration. Because the reality is, depending on how fast you're pedaling, you're not capable of producing the same amount of power at every pedaling rate. So the idea of having a fixed energy bank, for a longer race, you have like an optimal control. We call it a minimum time, minimum fuel problem, where fuel is just generic for an energy bank. We're not concerned with the fuel right now. We're only concerned with speed, assuming that the fuel will be there. Okay, so our only assumption here, we got 3 gear options. Let's assume this cyclist weighs 70 kilograms and the torque that she produces looks like this. It's 150 Newton meters minus 5.73 times the pedaling rate. So what this means is her ability to produce torque looks something like this. For low pedaling speeds, she has 150 newton meters. And then I think I chose this so that as she gets up to 250 RPM at the pedals, the torque she can produce drops off like this. So that's all that function means. So it's trying to find a realistic function for her ability to produce torque. So to finish a race of 1,000 meters as fast as possible, which gears should she choose and when? So you have three options. The rule is this is how she has to produce torque. Which gears do we choose and when? Let's assume that we have a rolling start of 2 meters per second. Whew. Okay, let's get started on this problem. So now we're going to look at the full bicycle. We did a free body diagram on just this rear portion before, and we're going to leverage that, but we also have to consider the front tire here as well. And we're considering the mass of the cyclist. So let's get into it. First, we're going to do a free body diagram on the overall bicycle, and I'm ignoring aerodynamic drag at this point, just to make it simple. So, I mean, we do have the weight and the normal force distributed across the tires, but we're not worried about that. We're worried about the forces in the X direction. And that's actually pretty simple. You're going to have a tractive force produced at the rear driven tire. And then you're going to have a friction force at the front tire, which goes in the opposite direction. Because this front tire has no torque that's being produced on it from the pedals. The only thing that's making it roll is the ground underneath it that's passing by, and assuming and whatever traction it picks up there. If you've been watching any of the Tour de France, it was like raining a lot in the first stages, and people were crashing like crazy. So the tractive force was an issue. Okay, so here we're going to take some of the work that we did before, and so we already know what the tractive force at this rear tire is as a function of the pedaling torque. Okay, so I'm going to take that. So we know that friction force on the rear tire, but what's the friction force on the front tire? So if you start coasting on a bike, does the FX on the back wheel switch directions and become FF? That's correct. Pavlo, that's correct. So what he's saying is like, well, what if I stop producing torque at the pedals and I quit producing traction? I just pull my feet up and let this thing spin on its own. Well, then the rear tire would be undriven as well, and it would just have like a friction force. You're absolutely right. Okay. So what is this friction force on the front tire? Or if you're coasting, what would it look like in general? So we're going to have whatever the friction force is acting over the radius of the front tire. Let's just assume that those are equal. So, okay, the distance that the bike travels, X, that's going to be equal to the distance that that this tire rotates times the radius of the tire. And if we assume that the front and rear tires aren't slipping at all relative to each other, this is also going to be equal to the angular distance that the rear tire moves. And I think I was just calling that theta t. So, okay, so basically the front angular distance that this tire moves is going to be same as the distance that the rear tire moves, which makes sense. The front and rear tires are moving synchronously together, so the velocities will be the same, the accelerations will be the same. So, yeah, why am I doing this? Because the front acceleration will be equal to the rear acceleration. And so we have an expression for the rear acceleration that I can just substitute in here. So this friction force, it'll be the inertia of this front tire divided by the radius of this front tire times the angular acceleration of this tire, but that's going to be the same as the angular acceleration of the rear tire. All right, we got like 1 minute to bring this together, and it'll set us up for next time. This will be fun. Okay, so we're going to bring all of this together. We're coming back to the overall equation of motion for the bicycle. The mass times its acceleration is the tractive force that we're generating at the rear minus some of this friction force at the front. And so if I take that tractive force, this is what it was, R2 over R1 times the torque that I produce at the pedals minus the inertia of the rear tire times the angular acceleration of the rear tire divided by the radius of the tire. So that's the tractive force. And then this friction force that we just solved for that we're subtracting, it's the inertia of the front tire, which we're just assuming it's the same as the rear, divided by the radius of the tire, times the acceleration of that tire. And I just use theta sub t for both tires because we're assuming that they're spinning at the same rate. Okay, so if we simplify this a little bit, 1 over radius of the tire times this gear ratio, R2 over R1, times this torque, minus 2 IT over RT equals this. Okay, so we're almost done. We'll finish right here. But I wanna create an equation here that's in terms of x double dot. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to take this, the angular acceleration of the tires, and I know that this is related to the acceleration of the bike in this way, as long as the tires aren't sliding. So if I substitute this in here, then I can get everything in terms of x. And then we're going to simplify to this equation down here. 2IT over RT, R2 over R1 times the torque. Okay. So we have the mass of the bike and the person plus this equivalent mass that comes from the tires. So we talked about how when you rotate stuff up, it effectively adds some equivalent mass as far as your acceleration is concerned. It's some additional mass. This is going to be equal to 1 over the radius of your tire times this gear ratio times the torque. And we're assuming in this problem, this gear ratio is variable. We have 3 choices. We can choose the radius of the rear cassette. So let's substitute this in here. I can choose this gear ratio, and then what was our expression for the torque that I can produce at the pedals? Where'd you go? So that torque is equal to 150 minus 5.73 times my pedaling angular velocity. Wouldn't it be 2 IT over RT squared? Yes. Yes, thank you. Right here, RT squared. Thank you, Fly. That's my mistake. So we're going to have here the acceleration as a function of pedaling speed, because the torque is ultimately a function of your pedaling speed, and it's a function of our gear ratio. So sorry, I'm running over time a little bit, but this is where we're going to pick it up again next time, because our goal is to maximize acceleration, right? So we're going to do a problem where we say, okay, if my goal is always to maximize acceleration in this race, what gear should I be in at which speed and whatever? So we'll come up with a racing strategy. That's what we're doing. So cool. LOL. I love theory. Awesome. Time to try to figure out the rest of the flight dynamics homework. You got it. Can you provide some good books on bike dynamics? This, honestly, I just picked up kind of on my own. Let me think, though. Jenna says, thanks, Professor S. See you Friday. See you. See you, Jenna. Bike dynamics textbook. There's gotta be. But I think, so I know good, see you, BJ Reiner. I have some good textbooks on road vehicle dynamics, and a lot of the models that we're going to use for cars are applicable to bikes. I wish I had some money. I would so subscribe to this. We need more teachers. Hey, UB Math Prof, welcome. Hey, Chimney Snacks, you have a good day, my friend. Yeah, this is fun. I'll post as far as we got as soon as I sign off, and then you guys will be able to go back through here. I know we blasted through a lot of free body diagrams pretty quick. It takes some time to sit and think with. Hey, Billy, thank you. UB Math Prof, is that a little dog with a tentacle appendage? beautiful Wednesday out there. It is a beautiful Wednesday. Are you teaching today, UB Math Prof? Offline office hours. Have a great day, Barry Bloke. Offline, do you mean on campus or do you mean... Okay, off Twitch. What are you using? Are you using Zoom? Or Discord? Sweet jams. Yeah, so I subscribed to Soundstripe, which gives you the license to every song that you play. So there's no copyright issues. Soundstripe. Looks like this, and then on this right-hand side, like I have the license for everything. Soundswipe? Hopefully no issues. We could also make royalty-free music ourselves. Yeah, that's true. I have played some of our jams. Let's see here. Maybe we should outro. There we go. This is a classic, everybody. Wendy, what do you want to talk about? Because I doubt you forgot already. I think you have definite ideas about what should be done. Do you also have Dreaming My Days Away? I probably do somewhere. I hear you say in hospital and how Danny should be going there as soon as possible. his health is at stake. Oh yeah, I have listened to Neutral Milk Hotel. Wendy, don't you know I got responsibilities? Don't you know I signed a contract? Do you have the slightest idea about morals and ethics? Wendy, why don't you put that bat down? Because I'm not gonna hurt ya. You didn't let me finish my sentence. In my Twitch profile, it has a picture from The Shining in the background. Oh yeah. That's the you didn't poster from my office. My that's an awesome poster. I said I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm just gonna bash your brains in. I'm just gonna bash so funny. Did you see the new Charlie Kaufman movie on Netflix? No, what is this? What are you talking about? You've had your whole life to think things over. What good is 5 minutes more? The same guy who did Synecdoche, New York. Ooh, and that was a trippy experience. That's been a while since I watched that. With Philip Seymour Hoffman, right? Is it... what type of movie are we talking about here? Let's call it a romantic comedy. Here it says a drama thriller. Surrealistic abstract rom-com. Full of misgivings, a young woman travels with her new boyfriend to his parents' secluded farm. Yeah, that sounds like the basis for a great rom-com. I'm a little worried. Oh, yeah, actually it does. Alright, everybody. I gotta run. Good seeing you, UB Math Prof. I'll check out the trailer to that movie. Have a good one, guys.